Please be seated. I don't know about you, but I left worship last week pretty fired up. What we talked about last week in terms of our vision and God's reign was something that the council had been bouncing around for a while, and it felt great to kind of get it out there and share it with you all. Nobody threw tomatoes, so that was positive, right? And it was really great. If you missed it, it's available on YouTube. Our sermons are on YouTube now mostly. You can just go to YouTube and type in Holy Cross Livonia, and up it'll come. But for those of you who weren't here, we talked about how Jesus came to bring God's reign, right? Not just God's kingdom, but God's reign, and that was in eternity, and that's here on earth. And we had a whiteboard that we talked about it, and that was over here. That was Jesus' goal and vision, and something he invites us to help bring to life. And that happens when people are, well, that right there on that banner, people are claimed, met, called, and sent to be God's people doing God's work. And we accomplish that by being a community that inspires and equips people to live Christ-centered lives. One of the ways that we are a community that does that is by showing radical hospitality. I don't know if you noticed, but in the lobby we've got a literal umbrella hanging. It's the radical hospitality umbrella, right? Because if you're going to show radical hospitality, you got to have room for everyone. So just imagine it being bigger, like really big. It's really cool. And one of the ways, and then we talked about ways that we show radical hospitality. And there were 4. The first one is on that umbrella now. It's being gracious. We talked about being more gracious, kind, inviting, and generous. And if we can be a little bit more of those 4 things, gracious, kind, inviting, and generous, then we'll have more of the reign of God here on earth. That's what we talked about, and I was fired up about it. And I went home afterwards, and I walked in the door, and my phone went off. I had a text message, and I looked at it, and it said, Kobe Bryant died. And I said out loud, I said, what? And then I said, no. And I'm not even like a basketball fan of pro basketball. Like I'm a college basketball fan because I went to Syracuse, and you're kind of indoctrinated into that, right? But I'm not really a big pro basketball fan, and I was like, what? And then I read about it, and at that moment, he was a dad taking his kid to a game. I do that all the time, and I take other people's kids to games like he was doing, and I was just like, man, that was a bummer, that was a bummer. And I thought about this gracious, kind, inviting, generous thing. And I thought, I was fired up, but maybe it's not going to be that easy, And through the course of the week, in between now and then, there were other things that happened, other things that came up, other moments, bumps in the road, big and small, where it was tough. In these moments, to be gracious and kind and inviting and generous. And, it was just one sermon. Just 18 long minutes of your life, And I thought, how do we do this? Because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And how do we keep hope? That's really what I was asking. I was wondering, how do we keep hope? Because I read this gospel reading with Anna and Simeon in the temple. And these were old people, and it tells us, you don't often get people's ages in the Bible, or if you do, there's some crazy number. And it tells us that Anna was 84. And 84 then was like, there's some 84-year-olds in the room now, but 84 then was like, it was a just incredible number. Nobody lived to be 84 years old. She waited all that time to see this. Simeon was an old man. He waited all this time to see this. How did they keep hope? That they were going to see the Messiah, that they were going to see God's reign. How did they do that? I thought maybe if figure out how they did that, figure out how we could do it. So I thought about it for a while, and I did what you do in the 21st century when you have a question like that, which is I sent someone a message over social media, right? That's what you do, right? You ask it on social media. And the person I asked is my friend Kenneth. Kenneth is a retired pastor. Interestingly, we met on Facebook. That was how we got to know each other. And I sent him a message because Kenneth has seen some stuff. All right? He worked in the synod office for a long time, and I didn't know this until I talked. I knew he worked with this, but I didn't realize how many. He worked with 28 churches in his career that had experienced significant conflict or misconduct. And when you think misconduct, yes, that kind of misconduct, right? So he saw some stuff, And not only that, but he grew up in the South as an African American during segregation and Jim Crow. He's seen some stuff, So I said, can I call you? He said, sure, give me a call. I said, all right, Kenneth, lay it on me. How do you have hope that all of this can happen? How do you have hope that in the midst of all these things that life and the world are going to throw at us, that we can still find ways to be gracious and kind and inviting and generous? And he said, I preached a sermon on Martin Luther King Day. And I talked about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And he said, and everybody knows the end of it. But most people don't spend a lot of time talking about the beginning. But in the beginning, Dr. King talked about his family. And he came from a long line of devout Christians. And how in the midst of all of that stuff in the South that they had to deal with, the segregation, Jim Crow, all the racism, all that stuff, they showed him God's love. He saw God's reign through them. This is Dr. King we're talking about. And because he saw them be gracious, kind, inviting, and generous in the midst of those circumstances, he believed that he could too. And that we all could too. And that God's reign could come and win. And then Kenneth told me about his family and how he had seen the same thing from them in the midst of his upbringing and his childhood and his life in the segregated South. And how his family and his church and people of faith had shown him that you could be gracious, kind, inviting, and generous in the midst of all that stuff. And how he had seen the reign of God happen. And I thought about Anna and Simeon in this story. And how they had the stories of God's people in the scriptures and all the times that they had suffered and gone through hard things. And God had been gracious and kind and inviting and generous to them. And how they were able to do the same to one another. And they had seen God's reign come. I thought about all that, and I thought about here last week where I saw it. I did. I saw it here. You can't plan this stuff. You can't write it, But I saw someone just give someone a hug. Such a little thing. But it was all of those. It was all of those. It was gracious, kind, inviting, generous, all of it. And the reign of God happened. And I thought, okay, maybe we can do it. Just in little moments. Maybe we can. And I don't know what's going to happen to you this week. I don't know what happened to you last week. I don't know what's going to happen next month, but I'm going to bet money that there's going to be bumps. That life is going to throw you challenges and struggles, and they're going to happen. Right? And some of them will be big, and some of them will be little. And some of them will be tragic, and some of them will just be annoying. Have hope. Have hope that God is going to be gracious, kind, inviting, and generous to you, and God's reign will come to you. And have hope that despite whatever bumps life throws your way, you too can be gracious, kind, inviting, and generous to others. And God's reign can come through you. Have hope. Amen.